the neocons were basically saying Iran's developing a nuke. That's why we have to go to war with Iran. And then the deal was like, okay, well, they just agreed to a whole new inspections regime. So aren't you thrilled? And then all the neocons went, no, we're still not thrilled because blah, blah, blah. But the point is that they never believed Iran had a nuclear weapon. That was always just a pretense. And so they were annoyed that you took that pretense away from them. And this is part of the reason why Israel so opposed the Iran deal.
So Dave Smith recently got to talking about how it looks like for the moment, Trump has avoided and kind of shut down a war with Iran, or at least greenlighting Netanyahu to do military strikes in Iran with U.S. backing. And in a lot of ways, it kind of mirrors some of the things that were heard from the neocons when Obama enacted that deal with Iran that the Trump regimen tore up, essentially. But I want to hear what Dave has to say, because there's some interesting insights here. And when it gets to what this means for U.S. foreign policy and what we can expect for going forward, there's a lot to know here. So let's watch and let's react.
The one thing that we had not discussed yet that I really do think is worth bringing up is that it appears that at least according to reporting in the New York Times and other major publications, that is very much in line with what I'm hearing from behind the scenes. It appears that we came very close, really to the brink of a war with Iran that has been shut down, at least for now. Essentially, the New York Times was reporting that it is pretty wild that Israel drew up plans for striking Iranian, nuclear targets, whatever exactly that means. According to our own Director of National Intelligence and CIA, there is no movement on, like, Iran does not have a nuclear weapon and does not seem to be closing in on one. But regardless, Israel drew up these plans. The plans, of course, Rob, I mean, get this, it's just, you can't make this stuff up. The plans, of course, Israel could not do themselves. So the plans that Israel drew up involved U.S. backup and U.S. strikes as well.
Who's surprised by that fact, by the way, that Israel just assumes that the U.S. is going to be there to do its dirty work in terms of foreign policy bombing campaigns. And we've heard for years and years and years that Iran is months, days, seconds, milliseconds away from a nuke. We've been hearing that for 20 years at least. So this surprises no one. And of course, Israel still wants to bomb whatever sites are enriching uranium. Of course, there's many ways to enrich uranium and use it for non-military, non-nuclear weapon purposes. But that's not good enough for Israel, who always wants to bomb Iran and regime change in Iran. Netanyahu's wanted it forever.
This was presented to Donald Trump. Evidently, some senior members of Donald Trump's cabinet were all for this. And you could guess who they are already, as Waltz, Marco Rubio. And from everything I'm hearing and everything that's being reported, it seems that Tulsi Gabbard played a major role in convincing Donald Trump not to do this. And also from the outside, that Tucker Carlson played a major role in this. So it's, according to the Times, the Israeli plans were to attack in May. So this is like, it's the 21st of April today. This is coming up in a couple weeks, maybe 2 to 4 weeks or something like that. Like, this was going down, and Trump straight up thwarted it and was like, no, we will not back up. We will not back you up, and we will not help you with this strike. And he said that I guess they want to give Iran a few more months to negotiate before they make this move. So the threat is not off the table. But for now, at least, it has been, postponed or left in questions.
And that's the key thing here. Whether or not this is kind of a permanent policy carve-out for the Trump administration and he intends to resist war with Iran at essentially all costs, that's a huge deal. But if it's just prolonging a strike that would come, say, in the fall, that's we're back to square one. This is still neocon foreign policy. Now, the article that Dave references here also named Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, as someone who also talked Trump out of potentially helping with this strike that Israel wanted to do against Iran. And that surprised me a little bit, especially how he carried himself when it came to Yemen, pretty much talking about how awesome it was to bomb an apartment building that, a bomb maker from Ansar Allah just walked into to see his girlfriend. They took out that entire apartment full of innocent people. Like how great the U.S. operated in that respect, and the continuous bombing of Yemen that's happened since. How he's talked about that made me really think that, he's just one of these warmongers too. And he's not a chicken hawk. He served in the military. He served in war. But at the same time, he certainly has saber rattled. And, his talking point in that signal chat said, essentially connect Yemen to Iran. So that one surprised me. Tulsi a little bit surprised me too, because she's such a pro-Israel Zionist. But maybe the better part of her foreign policy senses that have opposed war in certain cases got the better of her. In either way, that's a good thing if this is the truth. And we'll just have to see how it turns out. If it just prolongs the strike, it's going to be a disaster. But if this carves out Trump's policy going forward and sets a precedent for it, that's great.
So I guess obviously, like, there's a lot of obvious takeaways from this, but since I've been fairly critical of Trump and been critical of Tulsi Gabbard as of late, I should give both of them credit that at least in this moment they didn't go through for right now with these what would have been catastrophic plans.
That's
and
fair.
Of course, Tucker Carlson deserves just immense amount of credit for the role that he's playing. I mean, thank God for these few people around Donald Trump. And then it also goes, it's one more piece of evidence that the whole what you might even call the Donald Trump doctrine at this point, which is essentially something like it's a great idea to have war hawks permeating your White House, because then everybody's scared of you or something like that. It just seems that it's like, well, it's actually a lot more dangerous because you might end up getting yourself into another war.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you have Waltz and Rubio in there, for heaven's sake, and John Ratcliffe. But Dave is right about Tucker's presence. Apparently, he's been in close contact with Trump since the beginning of this administration, and he's a pretty big non-interventionist. And, surprising a lot of people on the right, he's not a big fan of just doing Israel's bidding, which makes a lot of his opponents that just call him a conspiracy theorist. It gives them fuel to try to rake him over the coals. But props to Tucker, who, as far as I can tell, is really good on these issues, these foreign policy issues. So again, let's hope this sticks.
Although I suppose you could argue that, well, look, he's doing it. He's bullying them and then backing out. It just seems like a very dangerous game to play. But number one, it's just like more broad points. But number one, with the with the Iran deal, really was it's kind of an interesting thing, because it was, I would argue, one of the best things that Obama did, maybe the best thing that Barack Obama did. And, he had a disastrous foreign policy in many areas, a disaster in Iraq and Afghanistan, kept both of those wars going. I mean, he did, end the war in Iraq and then reinvade the country at one point there, because his project in Syria had been so disastrous that it spilled back over to Iraq. I mean, it's you can't even make this shit up, like how bad it was. You had, I mean, there was lots
in the
of
Pentagon looking at ISIS going, you're going the wrong way.
Yes, quite literally. Yes. I mean, there were all types of reports about this. There was a major report in the New York Times about this, about how in Syria you had Pentagon-backed forces fighting CIA-backed forces, like just the craziest foreign policy you could possibly imagine. Of course, he overthrew Muammar Gaddafi in Libya and led to the catastrophe there. Now that a lot of people who supported that intervention are now trying to walk that back as if they never really did. But we got your writing. We know what you said at the time. But and then of course, obviously, his policy in Syria is a disaster. But So then after his disastrous policy in Syria, he has to send troops back into Iraq to now fight on the other side of the Iraq, or of the other side of who he was supporting in Syria, essentially. It's just, the whole thing's nutty. But
you can tell how these entangling alliances really destroy U.S. foreign policy when at times the U.S. fights on two different sides of the same theater. It's so insane. And with Syria, it's just so absurd because as part of Operation Timber Sycamore, the U.S. was allied with al-Qaeda forces, and you had photographs with John McCain with al-Qaeda forces simply because they were opposing the Assad regime, who was the CIA's boogeyman at the time. They said he gassed his own people, right? All that nonsense to try to justify a regime change. Well, they finally got their regime change last year, but it was a disaster, and the U.S. still occupies like a third of that territory. And now you have persecutions against Christians when, for however big of an authoritarian Assad was, at least he protected religious minorities, including Christians.
The one thing, and then of course the catastrophe in Yemen that he backed in 2015, but like the one good thing, and then by the way, part of that catastrophe in Yemen was, as Obama officials have themselves said, because the Saudis were pissed off about his good policy in Iran, so then he backed their war against the Houthis in Yemen to win them back over or whatever, to placate them, is the quote. But the thing, it's a little bit interesting with the Iran deal, because it's like, the whole thing was fake, but yet it was still a very good deal. And the popular kind of like Fox News talking point at the time would be that Obama gave Iran a bunch of US taxpayer money in order for them to get rid of their nuclear weapons. But none of that's real. It's all just made up. None of it. What happened is that the US had a bunch of assets. So for people who know the history, just very roughly, in 1953, under Dwight D. Eisenhower, the CIA overthrew the democratically elected government in Iran and installed the Shah as a dictator. The Shah ruled until 1979, when there was a revolution, and this is when the current Iranian regime took over. And it's part of the reason why they hate our guts so much, because we once overthrew their democratically elected government. It's not the only reason. There's several reasons.
Who would believe that? The U.S. overthrowing democratically elected governments? There's no way. That would be in the news more, right? Just like Ukraine and the Maidan coup of 2014 was, right?
But that's one of them. And so essentially, right, when just fast forwarding to the Iran deal, back in 79, when the government that we backed and propped up was overthrown, there were like some Iranian assets. There was Iranian money that we froze in international accounts. Now, this money had been frozen the entire time, and a few international courts, I believe 2 international courts, had ruled that, like, you got to give this back to them. It's not yours. It's the Iranians' money. So that's what they got back. It wasn't U.S. taxpayer dollars. It was their own money. I mean, you could argue it wasn't theirs. It was the previous regimes, but you're getting into murky territory here. It was any government that has money, they have it because they took it from their people. So a previous government had taken it from the people, is giving it back to the new government. And, whatever you want to argue with that, it simply wasn't U.S. taxpayer money. It was Iranian money. And also, they didn't have nuclear weapons. So, like, all of this was made up. It was all nonsense.
It did enact a new inspections regime, I'm pretty sure, though. So
we gave them money that was already theirs, and they got rid of a thing that they never had. But it did lead to a new inspections regime. So they opened themselves up for a lot more inspections.
Right. I think I used the same wording there too. That's crazy.
Essentially, the whole point of the deal was just to take the neocon pretense for war off the table. So it was kind of brilliant in that it called their bluff. Like the neocons were basically saying, Iran's developing a nuke. That's why we have to go to war with Iran. And then the deal was like, okay, well, they just agreed to a whole new inspections regime. So aren't you thrilled? And then all the neocons went, no, we're still not thrilled because blah, blah, blah. But
yeah, because the neocons always lead with war. That's their end game is war. They believe in exporting democracy through the bayonet, or in these cases, bombs. And that's the first foreign policy option. That's the default. Diplomacy, or giving up a justification they can cite for being able to bomb countries, that should be off the table. That enrages neocons, and you're seeing that same thing right now because of this potential stoppage of war with Iran. You see people like Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin and like lots of neocons out on social media freaking out and enraged right now because they want bombing as the first option. They want regime change as the ultimate goal. That's the end game.
The point is that they never believed Iran had a nuclear weapon. That was always just a pretense. And so they were annoyed that you took that pretense away from them. And this is part of the reason why Israel so opposed the Iran deal. So then, of course, Donald Trump comes in. He tears it up. Well, he said he didn't exactly tear it up, but he had the U.S. back out of the deal. The deal is still in place between Europe and Iran, but regardless of that, but he basically tore it up because, like, you know, Obama's a loser and Obama's bad, and so everything he did was gay, and everything I do is great.
That was the exact quote, by the way. Oh, man.
And so they tore that up. Now, then Joe Biden came back in, and there was actually some pressure on Joe Biden. Like, there was a divide amongst the Democratic establishment. Some of them really wanted him to get back in the same deal, but ultimately he didn't. And so now we're back to having Donald Trump in there. And now Trump is going, Iran has to come to the table.
And it sure seems like the neocon influence in the Biden administration was more than the Obama administration. The Democratic establishment at that point had been essentially totally won over by the neocons, especially in regard to Ukraine. But it's not like Biden did anything to temper, you know, the stated foreign policy objectives and foreign policy campaigns of Israel either. And those included posture toward Iran. So that kind of makes sense in some ways.
They have to make some type of deal, even though they did, and he's the one who backed out of the deal that they were already in. But again, essentially what all this, and this is really one of the major problems with Donald Trump, is that it's all so much about his ego and his achievement that he just wants to get them back into a thing now that was the Trump deal, not the Obama deal. So he can say, like, I made this deal happen. Now it's got, you know, a gold-plated seal of Donald Trump around it. So that's essentially the situation there.
Yeah, you know what's ironic is I think if it were word for word the same arrangement that Obama had solidified with Iran, that Trump does the same. I think it was in 2015. If the same exact deal gets re-implemented, Trump would take credit. He would say it's awesome now, and that it's going to be the most amazing thing ever. It's the most amazing treaty ever. I made it. It's great. I can't do the Trump, so forgive me there. But that's how Trump is. He wants to market whatever he does, no matter what it does, as an accomplishment. He's done this in other regards, too.
It's like hopefully there's a way over these next few months, and evidently we don't have a lot of time here, because who knows, Donald Trump said no to him once, but who knows if he's going to say no to the Israelis again. Hopefully they can work out something in this time period to get back to some type of, you know, enhanced inspections regime or whatever Iran has to do to take this bullshit talking point that they have a nuclear weapon off the table. By the way, one more thing that should be mentioned is that even according to all the reports on this, even the Israelis were saying that these strikes would like thwart their ability to go nuclear for a year. So even they're not claiming that it's like, oh, this is one and done, and then we're out of here. It's like, no, you're getting pulled into another prolonged war.
Yeah, that's the craziest thing, too, is they don't want to make it seem like their preferences would be placated just by this bombing attack that they had planned. But they want a prolonged, continuous cycle of bombing that ends in and fulfills a total regime change operation. That's what Netanyahu has always called for. I think Dave is so good to be able to focus on that point, because that's one factor in this that's been lost. A lot of people haven't been talking about that 1 year thing, But, you know, the Israeli lobby, the Zionists, the Likud regime, and Netanyahu are not going to be satisfied until that regime is taken out, and the U.S. should play no part in it. It's not our war. And there's no capacity for Iran to strike the United States. Now, they could strike some of our troops in the region that are there because of the entangling alliances we have, not only with Israel, but also with Saudi Arabia. And that is a concern for sure. But so it doesn't make sense to rattle sabers with Iran, ramp up the tensions in any way, and I hope this sticks as policy. No Iran strikes. So if they did come to a deal soon, which looks like it may happen in a few days, I hope it does take that Neocon talking point off the table, much like it did in 2015, and then the Neocons are going to have to pound sand, hopefully for another decade, hoping for their regime change that doesn't come, at least in that time. That's the best case scenario here.
Which, you know, as we've learned over the last few decades, they can last for quite a while. We've fought the longest wars in American history in the Middle East, and there's no reason to think that this one wouldn't be another one of that magnitude. And also, there's no reason to think that it wouldn't be much, much bloodier for U.S. servicemen who are all throughout the region that Iran can touch.
Exactly. That's the big threat here. Iran is not a threat to the United States itself. It is a threat to our troops in the region. So the neocons will always cite that as reason to bomb Iran. But the better option is withdraw all of our forces from the Middle East. Get those resources out, bring all the troops home, and all the foreign bases there, all the ties to Israel, and that would be the true America First solution. Will Trump do that? No, he won't. So it's a little utopian to believe that, even though that is the stated preference, and it's not utopian in terms of U.S. history. For about a decade, the Monroe Doctrine took hold, and we weren't participating in all this empire-building madness. But now we have to hope for a good deal that takes war with Iran off the table. Spoil these Likud and Zionist idiots that want to get us involved in this, the bloodshed, the debt that comes with it. Take that talking point off the table. It'd be a good thing. Best case scenario would be being out of that theater. I don't think it's going to happen, at least in this presidency. But next best thing is come to that deal, take the primary neocon talking point out of the mix so we can't justify these continuous bombings in Iran. And you can tell that Netanyahu, the Israel lobby, neocon pundits in the United States are pissed about this, and that's a good thing. So at least we got that going for us. I'm not fully optimistic that we will avoid all types of strikes with Iran during Trump's administration, but let's hope for this deal. But let me know what you think. Do you think that we will get through Trump's second term without any bombing of Iran or support for bombing in Iran where the U.S. is supporting Israel? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, no more empire. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Peace out, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.